Welcome to this video posted in honor of the bicentenary of George Eliot, born as Mary Ann Evans in 1819. I made this biographical dress in the year 2000 to represent her at a women's festival. It is loosely based on the one she is wearing in a very much idealized portrait. In reality, she looked more like the one in my hand, but I based my embroidery on the other one in order to mirror the dress. My idea for the festival was to tell a story with the help of the 12 hand-embroidered portraits in sepia tones like old photographs positioned round the hem of the skirt. Face to face, I could tell as little or as much as my audience required. In this video, knowing that all of you have access to as much information as you desire on the internet, I will restrict myself to a few brief remarks, just enough to whet your curiosity. Her own portrait holds the place of honor at the front. She was the literary queen of her epoch, and she led a most scandalous life for a woman born in the same year as Queen Victoria, whose reign is synonymous with strict moral standards. Victoria's portrait graces the middle of the back of the dress. Both the Queen and the author became icons of their age, though the one stood for all that was virtuous, while the other was the epitome of the fallen woman. Yet Queen Victoria admired her works very much and even obtained her autograph. That Victoria should ascend the throne was the unlikely result of dynastic chance, but less unlikely than the rise of Mary Ann Evans to the literary throne of her epoch. The daughter of a carpenter who rose to be a farmer and estate manager, she spent her youth in rural Warwickshire. Her father encouraged her intellectual development, though he could not have foreseen where this was going to lead her. Mary Ann accompanied her father when he retired to Coventry, where she made the acquaintance of Charles and Cara Bray. Charles Bray was a ribbon manufacturer, writer and philanthropist. Mary Ann felt supported and liberated in the free-thinking atmosphere of his house, where she met various intellectual visitors who widened her horizon even further. Her friendship with Cara Bray and her sister Sarah Hennell was equally warm and inspiring. Cara felt deeply disturbed when her husband tried to overturn her Christian faith during their wedding tour. When Mary Ann, once as devout a Christian as Cara herself, announced her own loss of faith and refused to accompany her father to church, this rebellious attitude was blamed on her friendship with the Brays. Their example shows that the Victorian age was not nearly as virtuous as might be supposed. Cara not only knew about her husband's infidelity, but adopted one of his illegitimate children, and she had an extramarital affair herself. Cara's sister Sarah Hennell was an intellectual woman. She was instrumental in delegating to Mary Ann a translation she herself had refused, that of The Life of Jesus by David Frederick Strauss, a controversial theological work on account of its rationalistic approach, and so demanding that Mary Ann declared it made her Strauss-sick. However, the work was finished and subsequently published anonymously by John Chapman, soon the owner of the radical periodical Westminster Review. He invited Miss Evans to join the firm in the position of sub-editor. The work was ill-paid, but both demanding and interesting. Although Chapman was the nominal editor, it was she who did the real editorial work, and she who knew how to manage the contributors both tactfully and efficiently. In return, she thus found herself in contact with leading figures of literary and intellectual London. She was living virtually in its centre, boarding at Chapman's house in the Strand, and thus complicating even more his already complicated household. This included not only his wife and children, but also their governess, who was his mistress as well. With her move to the metropolis, Mary Ann had become the more refined Marian Evans, and a most remarkable person indeed, a single young lady who moved freely in predominantly male circles. But there were new female friends as well, one of them Bessie Rayner Parkes, the daughter of the reformer Joseph Parkes, who, incidentally, had commissioned her translation of Strauss. Bessie was a remarkable woman in her own right. As a radical feminist, she established and edited the English Woman's Journal, and rather regretted her friend's own ambivalent attitude to these issues. It was Bessie who introduced to Marian her co-editor of the English Woman's Journal, Barbara Lee Smith, who in the course of time became her closest friend. Apart from her feminist activities that led her to become co-founder of Girton, Cambridge, the first university college for women, Barbara was a professional artist. She came from a wealthy, if unconventional, family. Her father had never married her mother, a humble miller's daughter. Among Marian's male friends was Herbert Spencer, philosopher and sub-editor of The Economist. He was also a great hypochondriac, capable of clapping on a pair of earmuffs when conversation became too lively. Marian was his close neighbour during her time at the Strand, and they were constantly in each other's company, which gave rise to the rumour that they were engaged. However, although Marian was very much attracted to him, going so far as to plead for his love in a poignant letter, he rejected her on the grounds that her lack of physical attraction was fatal, although on the other hand he described her as the most admirable woman mentally I ever met. But another man found her most attractive indeed, Spencer's friend George Henry Lewis, who wrote that to know her was to love her. Supposedly the ugliest man in London, Lewis was one of the most charming, intelligent and versatile intellectuals of his era. Journalist, author, literary critic, playwright and translator of French plays, temporarily even an actor and, finally, natural scientist, by the time he met Marian, he had also co-founded The Leader, a radical weekly newspaper. His partner in this was Thornton Hunt, who also happened to be the lover of his wife. As their marriage was supposed to be a liberal one, Lewis not only condoned her adultery, but registered her first 2 children by hand as his own, thereby forfeiting forever the possibility of suing for divorce. When he met Marian, he was disillusioned with his marriage and lived through what he called a very dreary, wasted period of his life. To her, he was a stimulating colleague, then friend, and finally lover. From the first, they also worked together. When she agreed to accompany him to Germany, to live openly with him, and to research for his projected life of Goethe, she made herself an outcast from society. She could not have been sure whether he would remain faithful to her. But as it turned out, this was the beginning of a very happy relationship that lasted until his death. He encouraged her to write fiction, he became her literary agent and supporter, and although on occasion he may have been overprotective, it is a fact that without him there would have been no George Eliot. She deliberately used his first name in a nom de plume, the surname of which is said to stand for "To L. Lewis, I owe it." Under this name she wrote the books that made it immortal: Adam Bede, The Mill on the Floss, Middlemarch, and all the rest. Her first book was Scenes of Clerical Life. Lewis sent the manuscript to his own publisher, John Blackwood, to appear in the popular Blackwood's Edinburgh magazine. Lewis did not reveal the author's identity, claiming that he was acting on behalf of a shy clerical friend. Cautious at first, Blackwood, who was to publish most of her future works, soon recognized the potential of his unknown author. When at last her identity was revealed, he was aware of the need of maintaining her anonymity for as long as possible. However, it could not last long. By and by, all the world knew that the author of these books with their high moral tone was none other than that scandalous woman, Miss Marian Evans, who posed as Mrs. Lewis. But her success and the fact that she and Lewis lived a faithful marriage in all but the legal sense helped to make her more acceptable in the long run. Still, as usual, most of the blame rested with her, the woman who supposedly had broken Lewis's marriage, notwithstanding her financial support of his wife and her illegitimate children. Lewis's own sons called her mother, while their real mother was Mamma. He kept up a reasonably cordial relationship with his wife and, strangely, the younger children appear to have been unaware of the fact that he was not their real father. When Lewis died, Marian was devastated. She devoted herself to the editing of the remaining 2 volumes of his scientific work Problems of Life and Mind. Then, surprisingly, she emerged from a period of intense sorrow to marry the banker John Walter Cross, 20 years her junior, and a mutual friend of her and Lewis who used to call him their dear nephew. This marriage promptly reconciled her long-estranged family, but had disastrous results for her husband, who attempted to drown himself at Venice during their wedding tour. His position, by his own estimation, was that of a cart horse yoked to a racer. Perhaps it was as well that Marian died after only 8 months of marriage, following a brief illness. Her widower dutifully compiled her life as related in her letters and journals. In this he edited her so heavily that the work was dubbed a reticence in 3 volumes. It did much towards dimming her fame in the immediate post-Victorian era. Yet this eclipse was short-lived. On publication of the Life, one of her friends expressed his hope that, in some future work, the salt and spice will be restored to the records of George Eliot's entirely unconventional life. With the present wealth of publications on her life and work, one may say that this hope has been amply fulfilled.